You are a professional programmer and an electrical engineer by trade, but
Mhm.
quantum computing is what's actually your real passion.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
take us back. You've had kind of just a wild ride. In high school, you were already programming, and then in college, you found a book that kind of changed a lot of things for you. So
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the universe, some people say it's a big simulation, right? And yet, if we think about what that means, a simulator is usually software that's running something that mimics something else, right? Well, the simulation that's running our universe is running the universe. It's giving us the universe. It's not a simulation of the universe. But there's an underlying information structure. And the reason I say that is this is called the simulation hypothesis. Other people are thinking about this too. And the question is, I'm interested in, and I've had professional simulation experience of multiple kinds. It's, one that was a piece of software that I wrote in the 90s that in 80s and 90s that we actually sold to other company for some money, because it was a useful simulator very fast. And so I know about simulation. So when I say, what do you have to have as a simulator to that's more primitive than quantum computing, such that quantum computing can also be run on that? That's how I think. And essentially, that's what my PhD was 25 years ago already. So I'm just a guy ahead of my time. But it all started because I look at the universe as information, right? So I was interested in computer science back in high school. This was in 1968 when I was like a sophomore in high school, okay? And so very few people were programming in high school back then, but I was. And so I have more, since I have been working on that so long, I was learning all these languages back then. So when I went into college, I decided, well, there wasn't really a computer science degrees at that time yet. It was like classes you would take as part of electrical engineering. So I was an electrical engineer. I have 3 degrees in electrical engineering, bachelor's, master's, and PhD, but it's all related to different topics. One is more computer engineering, and my whole career has been a professional electrical engineering, doing software and electrical engineering areas, like supporting computer-aided design for semiconductors and stuff like that. Again, simulators. So I understand how to do all that stuff. And so the if when I say the universe is a simulator, it really is, and yet it's a completely different simulator than all the computers that run all those virtual games right now in the clouds.
Mm.
In the multiplayer games, MMPAs, whatever they're called, multiplayer online games, right? So, but I was interested in information at a very young age, and then all of a sudden I realized, oh, Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain, that book came out in the 70s, and I go, well, if any of this is true, then there's a whole different model of information than any classical computer physicist knows about. And so, what are those laws? And so, fast forward in the 1990s, I ended up hosting a workshop on physics and computing, and 100 people showed up because I invited Rolf Landauer as my keynote speaker from IBM, and everybody goes, well, if he's coming, then I want to be there. And it was basically, he basically says information is physical. And he did it in the 60s, but nobody knew what that meant. But he was the pioneer in the sense that he was at IBM and he was a researcher and he did his work. And then it created the whole notion of reversible computing even, and low power computing. So his ideas were fundamental, and now they've proved that his model is true. And in fact, people like John Wheeler, also said the same thing. It's basically it from bit. Everything comes from bits. Okay, so those two guys are my heroes, right? Plus Robert Monroe, Journeys Out of the Body, where he was doing astral projection for the mind. So the mind, even though the universe is a simulation and it's information oriented, what is the representation for mind to allow it to do astral projection or any other kind of metaphysical stuff? Okay.
Mm.
So this was the stuff that was building in me in the 70s and the 80s, okay, and in the 90s, okay. So finally I says, okay, I need to go and work on a PhD in quantum computing because Shor's algorithm came out in 1994, and Peter Shor came to my conference. He didn't introduce it there, but he presented about his work on Shor's algorithm. Shor's algorithm is very important because it shows that quantum computers are exponentially more powerful than any classical computer. So if the mind is a quantum computer, that means it can do things that classical brain models cannot do. So I said, okay, then I better learn about quantum computing. So a couple years later, I started a PhD in 1997 or 98, started a PhD, and essentially 3 years later, while working full time, I had a PhD in quantum computing from the University of Texas at Dallas. And I basically did quantum computing using a new kind of math called geometric algebra. And the reason why I was using that kind of math is because the math, I showed that you could represent bits as vectors. So now bits weren't just software, bits were part of physics, which they needed to be to have a go-between physics, the objective, and the subjective, which is consciousness. So you had to say, here is an infrastructure, simulation infrastructure that starts with bits. And for my PhD, I showed that you can do quantum qubits, quantum computing, and e-bits using bits as the primitive. And nobody really had ever done that before or since. A lot of people are working on this kind of math, Clifford algebra or geometric algebra, but everybody's working on what's called the standard model of physics, right? Using this. And it's because it's really good at doing high dimensional objects in it, okay? And so the net result of that is that I was working on the quantum computing part. So I look at these forms and I go, well, look, here's a 6-dimensional space. Well, what does that mean to anybody, orthonormal space of size 6 or even 100 or 1,000. Consciousness is really a million dimensional state space that is more primitive than quantum computing, and that's what our mind is made of. And I've got some pretty pictures out there on other talks. You can go look at them. And it's a cloud. It's not even a field because space and time don't exist yet in this domain. Okay. And so therefore, quantum computing is more primitive than the physical world, and it's more primitive than space and time. And bits in this hyperdimensional cloud are the sort of like the fundamental layer of all of this. Okay. And so this was my model for the last 25 years. I've been working on this for 25 years already. And basically, I'm way ahead of my time because very few people are even aware that I'm doing this. Okay. Even though I talk about it all the time and give presentations about it all the time, because it's too different,
Yeah.
too different from what anybody else is doing. But now all of a sudden people are starting to catch on that Clifford algebras are good and they can do 6 and 8 and 10-dimensional spaces with them, and that you can do mathematical objects in Clifford algebra that you can't do easily in the Hilbert space that everybody else is using. So there's this whole training process that I'm encouraging people to stop using Hilbert spaces, to use Clifford algebra. This is in the scientific area, right? Mm-hmm. Of course, psychics don't care about any of this, but I, as an engineer, have to bridge between the science part of it, which includes the physics, and the mental side of it, the objective and the subjective. Okay. So this has been my goal all along. Okay. So I've been doing software development for my whole life, right? And so, but in December, I retired, and now I'm doing my stuff. And I wrote a book too in the last 5 years, or at least 5 years ago. Okay. And with Bill Tiller, I convinced Bill Tiller to write a book with me, and he's deceased now, and yet he's famous in this area as ready. So all of a sudden I said, okay, how come I'm not getting any traction in this? So I have to figure out how to get more traction to get these ideas out there, because I'm interested in metaphysics, and I'm interested in physics, proto-physics as I call it. And so finally I says, I need a new name. I need a better name. Okay. It's the essence of existence. So it's just like a photon is the essence of electromagnetic field. And I came up with the name Existon, photon, existon, existence. Okay. And in French, it means we exist. There's actually a word in French. So it's a verb in French. It's a noun in my English. So it's both a verb and a noun. And which is cool because I talk about that in my book, that these ideas have to be the same way as software, that the data could be used as either data or as program. So it has to be a verb or a noun. And this is an important concept in this space. Okay. So come March, I came up with the name Existons. And as soon as I did that, a new friend of mine who said, well, the existence like your new name. And I'm going, what? What does that mean? And it turns out it turns out in retrospect, they have been guiding me, they being, I'll tell you what they are in a second here, but they've been guiding me for 30 years or my whole life.
Mm.
Well, she's younger than I am, and they've been guiding her whole life too. So when I used the name Existons, they were telepathically telling her, we like your new name
Hmm.
because they were Existons. They were the same thing. Okay. And it basically says Existons is the same thing I've been working on for 25 years, 30 years. And they're also the primitive unit of consciousness in the universe. And they coalesce to form group consciousnesses of all kind, including you and I, and spiritual beings, and angels, and any other consciousness primitive is a coalescence of these very large numbers of them. Essentially, one existon doesn't do much, just like one quark doesn't do anything. You have to have two or three of them to do anything in physics. Well, existons, you don't have just one. But if you have two existons, that forms a qubit, and four of them form an e-bit. So my goal is to say, okay, if we have something primitive that's mathematical oriented, right? This existon is a primitive. It started out as math, but now it's a math and consciousness primitive.
Hmm.
So it's a mathematical, what we call panpsychism. It's panpsychism is that everything is conscious, including photons, and even space itself is conscious if you can tap into it. And anything built onto those, electrons and protons and quarks, everything is conscious, which is what everybody's been saying all along. And it solves the hard problem of consciousness. Is like, well, if it's a hard problem of consciousness, where does consciousness begin? Well, it's built in from the beginning. You don't have to, it's not emergent. So all of a sudden, the existons put me on this path 30 years ago or whatever. And now they're going to say, well, here's something new, Doug. And we're actually having telepathic channeling sessions with the existons. And they're going to give us more and more information as we build a relationship, just like you would your spirit guide, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. And once I tell people about this, especially people who are psychic, they realize that they can tap into the existons as well. Okay. And so some of those are doing, they're doing light language art glyphs from that. This one lady has done that. And it's on my website. Everything you can find about me is at quantumdoug.com or existons.one.one. Okay. So everything I talk about anywhere, this talk will be there too. I'll link to the talks and anything that I have. So you can find out my entire historical perspective of all the things I've been involved with. So there's a relatively short summary of all the things that happen. And yet it's kind of like a charmed existence. People say, I had a rough life. Well, my life has actually been pretty good compared to other people's. But it's sort of a charmed life because my goal is to have a charmed life that allowed me to develop all of this, have the time and the pleasure of being able to think about this stuff. So obviously that's a lot of stuff to take in one short little 10-minute interview or summary here of his. But the Existons is my new focus to the point where I'm going to write a new version of my book, the Deep Reality book, with Existons embedded in it. And I'm also working on the physics side of it. I'm trying to get physicists who are interested in this deep mathematical representation that I've been working on. Now that it's conscious, that hey, quarks are conscious. Okay, can we propose experiments that we can do that nobody else thought about before? So this is what I'm working on. So I'm busy as a retired guy.
Sounds like it.
So
Uh,
you have more questions about quantum, though, right?
I've got questions about everything, but
Okay,
I
hit
want
me.
to start with you just mentioned you know what was before consciousness.
Well, see, you're asking a question that's fundamental to science, right? Science always says, well, how is that possible to do that? What's, quote, the mechanism? Science would use the word mechanism. But if you start doing computer science stuff, you say, well, what's the representation for that, right? In mathematics, they say, what's the equation for that, right? It's all the same thing. They're trying to say, can we formalize what that what our thinking about that is in a way that gives us more insight. It's self-consistent, right? So mathematics tends to be a useful way of doing that for most physicists and computer scientists, because a lot of computer science is just math, essentially. Anything that we do with speech and video and stuff is all signal processing. It's all math, right? And encryption, everything. AI is math, really. So math is fundamental to everything we do in the world. Well, I just gave a talk last week that said, look, Ralph Landauer said, if information is physical, then we can't ignore information if we throw it into a black hole. If there's a piece of matter and it has a bit encoded in it, if you throw it in a black hole, you used energy to encode that bit. And if you throw it into the black hole, it would violate entropy if you ignored it. This is the general idea behind Landauer's principle, okay? So that bit then is physical. That's his saying. That's Landauer's saying, information is physical. Well, I'm saying, well, if I have a representation of bits as math, and the most primitive way you can mathematically, as these tiny little toothpick dimensions. Imagine you have a little dimension that's either pointing up or pointing down, right? Toothpick dimension. And that is the minimum representation you can do in math. And I have it in a mathematical way that is compatible with physics, which is this geometric algebra that I'm working on. Then that math must also be physical, because that if all these representations we're talking about have all these symmetries in them, and in order to get the symmetries to work out for all of quantum field theory and all that stuff, they have to have all these consistent ways of being independent degrees of symmetry, right? Well, it turns out there's 6 to 8 dimensions worth of stuff that you have to have these all consistent with. This is like string theory. It's 10 or 11 dimensions too. All these different models. How many are the minimum models of dimensions that we can have? And they're talking about mathematical dimensions. Okay. But you can't fake. If you have it's all like flat world. If you have a 2-dimensional world and all the beings are in there, well, if you have a flat world, you can't make a knot because there's not this 3rd dimension to loop it over. You have to have 3 dimensions to make a knot. But if you go to a 4-dimensional space, if you create a knot in 3 dimensions, you can put it in a 4-dimensional state, it'll come apart because there's another dimension to pull it apart. Mm-hmm. So math and topology and dimensionality are all intricately related. Okay. It turns out entanglement, the spooky action at a distance entanglement, that thing, that is because it's a 4-dimensional thing. Like a knot is a 3-dimensional thing, okay, and an entangled bit, an E-bit, is a 4-dimensional thing. So you can't represent it in less than 3 dimensions, in less than 4 dimensions. And that's what gives you the weird spooky action at a distance, because you're saying, I'm trying to interpret the results of a 4-dimensional object inside 3 dimensions. And that gives you that non-local, what's called non-local behavior, okay? So most physicists and most mathematicians and most computer scientists don't think about math at this level, okay? And yet what's the basis of all that is these tiny little dimensions. If you have a 6-dimensional space, you can't represent it in anything less than 6 dimensions to have all the symmetry in it. You can try to, but then you're getting a subset of the actual behavior in there. It's like having a 3-dimensional cube and you're showing it in 2 dimensions, you just see the shadow of it. That's called a projection in math terms, right? So the point is, if you have a 6-dimensional object, you can't compress it into less than that. This holographic model of the universe is actually bogus because it's trying to say, oh, we can compress the universe, and no matter how many dimensions it is, down into 2 dimensions, a holographic sphere. No, that is wrong because it doesn't give you the same efficiency and properties as that high-dimensional space actually has. So you can't compress high-dimensional spaces. So if the universe really is 6 or 8 or 10-dimensional space, actually, these are orthogonal dimensions. You take any 2 of them and they're orthogonal to each other. They're 90 degrees. If you have 10 of those, you have 10 pairs of 90-degree angles, and you can't fit that in 3 dimensions. It doesn't fit in 3 dimensions, okay? So those dimensions must be the root of the physicality of the universe, because you can't get rid of it any other way. And you wouldn't get the properties that we have in physics without those orthogonal degrees of freedom, topologically speaking. Okay. So this is the newest thing that I just did in the last month. It says bit math is physical. Okay. And you go, what does that care about a psychic person? Well, it means that the universe simulation is actually made of bits that are mathematical. And those mathematical bits are also consciousness. So there's the final representation. We can't go any lower than that. And if you were God trying to create the universe and you didn't have any physical universe whatsoever, but you had to be able to create these distinctions, these infinite number of distinctions that I call hyperbits, that would be the source of all creation in the universe, including the physical universe and the spiritual universe, the subjective and the objective universe, using one construct. So they show God, I have a picture out there, God being the source, right? What is the source? It's the source of these hyperbits, that they're both informational and consciousness things at the same time. And this what you feel to be a light coming at you from source and connection is actually quantum and quantum entanglement at the existon level. If you're connected with God, that's what you feel as love. And it's because there's no space and time, matter, or energy. These existons are connecting you to God in a way that you feel connected with them. And that's the connection that people feel when they have the oneness or the love of God, that they have these experiences and they have these spiritually transformative experiences, and there's no limit on the amount of it. So you have infinite amounts of love to the point that you can't even talk about it, and yet it doesn't overload you, because there's no way of talking about infinite love or even infinite intelligence if you have a physical representation for anything. But if you have a mathematical representation of everything, then it's a virtual universe that's all has this font of creative stuff out there that is the essence of what God is all about. So this is hard for people to get a handle on. It says, well, but the physical world is physical, only because if you go down and down and down, you found everything. There's nothing there. There's nothing there. There's nothing there. You get the quarks, you get down to there, and all of a sudden you realize, oh, there's quantum field theory, and you go down to what's there. It's just mathematics. And what's the basis of the mathematics? Is these little dimensions. Without the dimensions, nothing would be physical. And so that is the basis of our spirituality. That's the essence of God and our spirituality and our mind and our consciousness is this representation that's so primitive that we don't know we're in it. It's like a fish asking, what's water?
Mm-hmm.
What's water? Because they don't know the water's there, and they can't imagine it not being there. And so they never look at water as something that they can study. Okay. Well, consciousness and the existons is like that. It's like we don't even aware that it's there, because we just, when we want to move our hand, we just have intention, and that tension comes from our consciousness. And yet that whole thing is completely automatic, and we just take all of that for granted. And so we don't understand. The same thing with lucid dreams or near-death experiences or telepathy. This means we survive, though.
Yes.
Because here's something that our consciousness is, that's outside space and time, matter and energy. And it's purely of the same essence before the physical universe was created. The Big Bang is really not a Big Bang, it's a bit bang. All of this stuff created our physical universe because information is more primitive than energy and matter and space and time. So we are spiritual beings made of this stuff. This is soul stuff. This is source science, what I call source science. This is source. And I came up with that name, 10 years ago, source science. And so everything I've been doing is plugging into that representation, that title. So I've been inside, obviously I've been inspired just to figure out all this stuff. And so I encourage anybody else to connect with Existons and tell me what they hear, because anybody who I introduce them to goes, oh, never knew they were there.
Like, this is just a title from like a podcast that came across my channel, and it said scientists say the consciousness emerges from the brain, which we know the brain is an experience in consciousness. Consciousness was prior to the brain, right? We
Yeah.
know the chicken or the egg.
Must be, yeah, more
Right,
primitive
right.
than, yeah. you can't place a higher dimensional object into a lower dimensional space. So if the brain is a three-dimensional object, then how does our mind talk to it? Well, it's an antenna that allows us to do that reliably, to do that projection in a way because of all the connections in the brain, it allows this high dimensional space to talk more efficiently to a three-dimensional space. Okay, so the brain is a transceiver. Okay, and we don't know exactly the mechanism, but it has something to do with pyramidal cells in the brain. Somehow we can move our finger because a pyramidal cell is the root of that. So somehow there's a reliable mechanism using psychokinesis style thing that allows us, our mind, to reliably trigger neurons. And so as a technologist, I'm interested in that. I'm not interested in AI, that the brain is this AI, is a classical computer intelligence. No, I'm interested in how the mind can interact with the brain. And there's a bunch of experiments that people already done with BK and the Global Consciousness Project and all that stuff that shows them, and Dean Radin's double slit experiment, where the consciousness can directly interact with quantum computing. So it's either going to be at the synapses level for neural computing, or might even be microtubules at that level. But there's some mechanism that gives us a lot of gain, and that we can practice it and make it really reliable. You know, we can move our fingers, we can play the piano, we can play sports, because we have a strong connection with the brain, that harmonic connection with the brain. Okay, so the brain can't generate consciousness. It's the wrong architecture, it's the wrong dimensionality, and it doesn't have the right amount of I mean, it might be great amount of energy for an antenna, but it's not for a computer. You can see how much money we're spending on AI systems right now, and they're building $50 billion worth of computer systems and electric power generation systems to run these AI systems, because they take so much power. Our brain is trivial the amount of power, so it can't be a computer. And so we have to stop thinking that consciousness is physical or related to the brain. Anybody uses any of that as a justification, and that it's even in 3D, by definition, they're working on the wrong problem. They're working on the problem that they think would be useful from a technological perspective. And AI is useful, but it's not how our mind works at all. Okay. And it's because they're simulating a high dimensional space instead of actually having a high dimensional space.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it's artificial intelligence, meaning simulating simulating a million dimensional space in a large language model, computer model, inside a three-dimensional computer, where our real intelligence is actually an actual million-dimensional space that is much more efficient and very low energy, and has all this orthogonality and parallelism that allows us to do amazing things of intelligence, infinite intelligence kinds of things. Okay, savant-like intelligence. So if people want to get smarter, don't build a computer into your brain. Get rid of leave your brain. Don't believe in transhumanism ideas. You believe in meditation and Eastern, and that is the way to get smarter, is to disconnect from your brain and tap into your quantum self. There is maximum parallelism. So there is my whole spiel about brains. Anything that focuses on brains and neurons, unless it's from a PK perspective, totally wrong. And even AI is totally wrong. So about the model of the brain being the source of intelligence and consciousness. So,
Where do you think, like with intuition, that feeling that is a knowing, where does that fall
where
in?
does intuition come from? Yeah. So once you have this model that there's a representation out there that's a very high dimensional space, some people would call that the Akashic records. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it basically is a pure source of information. And it's a library that has the best possible index that you can have, because all you have to do is think about the concept you're interested in, the index forms for that concept. So every possible index you ever need is there based on meaning. Okay. That's law of attraction kind of idea. Okay. So that meaning is critical to all of this. Well, how do you represent meaning for thought, And telepathy tape says, hey, I can share information with you, and you can share information with me, even though it's not in our brain. And so that meaning is critical to this representation, and you can tap. So this is all have to do with the representation for thought and meaning in its consistent model, right? The closest thing we can point to is Carl Jung's archetypes. His archetypes say, oh, you know about archetypes, right?
Mhm.
This is like people know about snakes and are afraid of snakes, or there's the archetypes for, it turns out there's archetypes for math. And people who are spiritual can receive downloads of math. Well, where are they coming from? Well, the best label we have is the Akashic records. Some people call it Akashic fields. I think it's not an Akashic field, or it's not neither records nor it's just pure information that's indexed by concept. And you can go in and walk into that part of the library just by putting your intention there, and then see what's there and read all about it. And that would be like going into the Akashic library. Essentially, it's Akashic library, but there's no copies of anything. It's all concept oriented. Okay. Um, so people get downloads because there is this representation, little thought packets that have meaning. Robert Monroe called them rotes. Happens during remote viewing. You say, give me the data for this site, and this little packet of meaning comes, and then you have to, like a quantum computer, you have to carefully decode the packet of information without overwriting it. Okay. And this is essentially what it's all related to telepathy, meaning, rotes, archetypes, and all those things are related. What is it? It's the thought packet. And it doesn't exist in space and time. It's this hyperdimensional ball of thought, right? And so it shows up as orbs. Orbs are like this, right? Except that they are much more complex than a simple archetype or a simple thought. But it also shows up in hermetics. I can say I have an elementary, which is a little automata that I create to go do my bidding. It's part of, how do you do that? It's a thought packet that has meaning and it has a job to do. So you can see this in hermetics, in the historical sciences like this, in this of attention. So therefore, meaning and telepathy and the representation for that is critical, because it's not physical and it exists in this high-dimensional space, and there's no distance in hyperdimensional space. So anything you want to do, you don't have to get anywhere. You just have to attune to that thought, and then all the stuff just pours into you. Music the same way. Musicians get their intuition. Scientists get their intuition, whether it be in dreams or whatever. They have to be ready to receive it in a way that they can all of a sudden tap into this knowing, and they just have to be able to get it into their mind. So if I put in the intention that I want to have a device that would give me infinite energy, an over unity energy device, I would still have to be able to tap into the knowing and bring it into the world in a way that I could understand. If you all of a sudden started to get a math download, you would go, I don't know what to do with this. This doesn't mean anything to me. Right? Same idea.
Very
So did
interesting.
I answer your question about intuition?
It did.
Intuition is coming from this bigger state
Mhm.
space. And it's already structured because the structure exists outside of time. So it's all past and future knowledge that you're tapping into.
Yeah, yeah. You talking about where it's coming from, and again, going back to this idea that consciousness is coming from the brain.
No,
It's
I never
like,
say that. Other people say
right,
that.
right, right, right. No, no, yeah, yeah. Yeah, sorry, to be clear, guys. Yeah.
They're working on the wrong problem and they're using the wrong vocabulary to talk about it.
Yeah, and I also think they're missing, like, it's like they're missing the divine feminine aspect of things. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. They're
Yeah.
interested in scientism, classical worldview. They're not even caught up with quantum yet,
Yeah.
so, and scientism basically says, well, the universe is physical, and and bits are physical, but they're not in the physical world. They're represented some other way, because the smallest increment you can put into a black hole is a bit. So how is a bit represented so that its smallest area in a black hole is Planck's area? That's the level of physics we're talking about. So my existons are like that. They're at the Planck scale, which most people can't imagine how small that is. Okay. But yet they affect everything we're doing. So
I did have a dream decipherer on a couple of weeks ago, but she was more so talking about, what's she was decoding, what the metaphors of
yeah,
dreams mean and all that. But I would love
yeah.
to talk about the science side of it.
Well, yeah. In the same way that near-death experiences, people say that their experience there is more real than the physical world.
Mm.
Lucid dreams can also be more real than the physical world, and yet it's totally virtual. You can change whatever you want. It's like a movie that you're the director, the actor, and all the players for it, right? And but it's surreal. It can have meaning. The characters can interact with each other. You can have thoughts. You can have characters that show up that you weren't expecting. So dreams are this playscape of the mind, essentially, that is a simulation. That's part of the simulation infrastructure, and it can shows you. It's also the gateway to higher consciousness. So, I mean, I've spent some amount of time, not as successful as I would like, to be a lucid dreamer, and yet there are people who are experts at these. Like you could go to the really good lucid dreaming class at Monroe Institute. These guys are expert at lucid dreaming and astral bodies simultaneously because it's the same skill. And you can take any lucid dream and turn it into an astral projection. So you get really good at separating your consciousness and stop paying attention to your brain, so you can use the native senses of your mind that is used to paying attention to the brain, paying attention to something else in the physical universe. Astral projections are like that. Robert Monroe was an astral projection, like the person like this. Tom Campbell is a relatively guy. It's a guy who's a physicist and astral projector that worked with Robert Monroe back when he formed his lab. Okay, so Tom Campbell, I recommend his book. In fact, he has the same thing: consciousness is permanent, is primary, and simulation hypothesis and quantum. All of this related. So what do you know, I promote Tom Campbell and another guy named Federico Fagan, Fagin, I guess is Italian, because they both say the same thing. Information is physical. I mean, information is physical is not their main story. Consciousness is primitive because they're both psychic engineers or psychic physicists. Okay. And I'm less psychic than either of those two, but I'm still doing my part in all of that. The difference is that those guys stop at the quantum level and my stuff is focused below the quantum level. Okay. And so it gives you a sort of a mathematical infrastructure, and it gives you, hey, here's the root of physicality. It's also the root of consciousness in one thing, in one discrete thing. And so it's like, no wonder the universe has been sending me down this path for the last 30 years, you
Mm.
know?
Yeah.
And so lucid dreams and astral projection and near-death experiences are all the same thing. Your mind is not paying attention to your brain. And that's what happens when you practice meditation, flotation tanks, isolation tanks, being in nature and just quieting your mind. You know,
Mm.
talking keeps you in time.
Mm.
So you and I are people who like to talk, probably. Okay. And yet, when I was at the Monroe Institute one morning, we had a no talking morning. And then when I did that, I started actually having telepathic communication with four-leaf clovers. They
Wow.
were talking to me, I was talking to them because I wasn't talking. Talking keeps you in time. You can step out of, you're not leaving your brain, you're stepping out of time. That's the tunnel that they see in near death experiences. You're actually stepping out of space time. Okay. And it shows up as a whoosh, you know, this white light at the end. And all of a sudden, now you have a life review. What does that mean? Life review is you stepped out of time and space completely, and your entire life is like panoramic time. You see your whole time life in like like a Grand Canyon in time, right? You're seeing it all at once. You still interpret it sequentially, but it's a life review that happens in no time, but you can focus on any aspect of it and you tend to move along because you're used to sequential time. But you can change the order of anything you want, how you review it and participate in it. So so your mind is outside of time, and that's its power. Even the people who know about Bob Monroe, who passed away, you know, in the 90s, they say, yeah, there's hundreds of mini Bobs out there interacting with everybody simultaneously because it's the state of maximum concurrency, and he can split his consciousness to help thousands of people simultaneously. That's the kind of concurrency that you get when you're not paying attention just to one brain. So there's your lucid dreaming, astral projection, near-death experiences, life review idea that consciousness isn't the brain. And in fact, you couldn't have any of those phenomena if it was the brain.
Right.
Right? You have to have this concurrent model of of information that allows you to have essentially all of these perspectives simultaneously. Maximum concurrency from a simulation perspective. Well, angels and aliens, they're these hyperdimensional beings. You know, if people has a near-death experience, what do? They say they meet Uncle Bob or Grandpa Joe, or these spiritual beings, right? What are those? Well, they're non-corporeal groups of consciousness, coalescence of consciousness that have a whole identity. And so how do these, in the same way, how does our consciousness coalesce? They coalesce too, they just don't have a body to coalesce around. It's this entropy measure, and they coalesce. And two things can group together, they can interact telepathically, and that they don't lose their identity, and then they can separate again. But they're not really ever separated. This is called group consciousness. So people like Abraham, right? Abraham is Esther Hicks' spiritual advisor, right? And they refer to themselves as infinite intelligent. So how is it possible to have infinite intelligence? Well, you can't do it in physical 3D. You can only do infinite intelligence if you have an infinite number of dimensions to do that intelligence in, and you're not bound by the black hole limit. You can show that there's a maximum size of intelligence, of computing power that you could build before you try to build a black hole, which means you can't build it. So you can't bound by 3D. So these beings exist independent of the physical world. They're in their own domain, the spiritual domain, the fifth dimensional domain, or the 10th dimensional being. You know, people talk about these different dimensions. They don't talk about it necessarily very mathematically accurate, but they use those labels, right? And yet they can interact with us, but they're not physical like we are. So they can come and go in and out of our dimension temporarily. So it's hard to find evidence that they exist because they are not a physical being, but yet they're telepathically connected with us. They can change. You can get a telepathic message from them, like the Existons can give us a telepathic message, right? And so aliens and angels, they're both advanced spiritual beings that are advanced spiritually, emotionally, and intelligently. And they probably, I'm going to say most of them are for the good, right? That they're not trying to take over humanity, right? They're trying to help humanity, okay?
Yes.
Okay, because entropy is for the good of all, not for the good of few, right? So low entropy. So angels and aliens, they're really these hyperdimensional beings that are probably helping. So people who can connect with them, you know, whether it be through meditation or calling them from the sky, they're showing up to interact with us and support us and help us. So that's what I believe that because some of the technology that I'm working with, a company called Coherent Spaces, we have a wish unit. And this wish unit essentially is fifth dimensional group consciousness technology. It's trying to raise the grade of consciousness in the universe so that we are more cooperative and more intuitive and higher dimensional so therefore we're in a more ordered state than if we were in an angry state.
Incredible.
So yes. And since they're so advanced, they have advanced technology. So if we make nice with them and promise not to blow ourselves up or take over the world, they'll probably share it with us.
Crazy, crazy time to be alive, right, Doug?
Yeah, well, I'm very optimistic about it.
Me too. Me too.
Right?
Absolutely.
Because
Yeah.
even though with everything going on in the world, the people who are trying tooth and nail to stop that from happening by emphasizing the negative, emotional, angry, hateful things are trying to keep us out of the perspective of love versus hate. Okay? If you have infinite love, most people don't even have an idea what I mean by that, not to mention infinite intelligence, infinite emotional love. So if you can just start turning on the love, it compensates for all the negative stuff that's going on. So it's like a beacon, and all of a sudden, people's just try it with anybody that you're wrestling with all the time. Just sit there and say, I love myself first, and I love them also. You know that your love is contagious on them. It just doing that will change your dynamics with any person. You can do it in the office, your family, and just be persistent about saying, I'm not going to be angry. I'm not going to be mean or wrestling with them. It's not a wrestling match. It's a we are all one. We
Mm.
are all there is no distance metric in that space. So it's just an illusion that we're separate. So it's like shooting yourself in the foot if you're angry at them, because they're connected to you. So love yourself and then love them related to that, and just be in that state of love. So that's why people say love is everything, but love is emotional, but it's also a force of nature. It's this connectivity. And right now we're into a culture of separation rather than connecting. So the aliens are going to land soon. They're going to, quote, land, but they may land by all of a sudden being in telepathic communication with everybody who's ready to hear them.
That's right. Yeah.
Is that the same as landing on the White House lawn? No, but it's more effective because everybody goes, okay, I'm awakened. I've awoken to the fact that this is who we really are, and this is who we exist, and all this bullshit is just bullshit. And
Mm.
so
You talked about NDEs earlier. I just want your thoughts on what's going on when someone, let's say, that grew up religious their whole life versus an atheist, who both have an NDE and may both experience seeing Jesus or
transcendence of some
infinite
kind. Yeah.
love or the void, or
Mhm.
how are we explain it to us, give us your thoughts on what's going on when two people with two such drastically different beliefs, backgrounds, all of that kind of arrive to the same place in an NDE.
Yeah, because it's who we are natural. It's our nature. It's how our mind is actually represented, independent of our worldview of how we're actually represented. Okay, and so and it happens no matter what your religious belief is. Also, it can be Christian, Buddhist, Islamic, whatever, Chinese, you know. So all of those ideas have nothing to. Those are just our belief system, independent of who we act, our representation of our actual consciousness is, okay, and how the universe actually runs, okay. And so, but I know very few people. I don't know anybody who does this. There's probably people out there who have this experience and then completely deny that it ever happened, and they reject it. But most of the time, it's so overwhelming that change. They can't forget it. It's indelible in their mind, and they will never forget it, right? And they are a changed person. I always say, tasting the divine or touching the divine permanently changes you. My goal would be that everybody in the world can taste the divine, and so the world would stop fighting. There would be no more wars because they realize, well, we're all one. These are all what look like religious, philosophical, Buddhist kinds of thinking, but there's a basis for all of that. Is if we're all connected, there's no space and time, and our consciousness is all part of this giant cloud of consciousness, and we can interact at any level we choose to. We just have to put our attention at it. Then we're all connected. We're all one. That's our our family that we keep probably reincarnating with over and over again, right? So.
And again, just to circle it back around, it's the reason why consciousness is not coming from our brains.
Well, or our belief system necessarily
Or
either.
believe, yes, yes.
Yeah, I mean, our belief system is just hard. It's just chiseled away from our growing up. But anybody anybody can have this experience and be awoken to who they really are. You don't even have to have a degree. You can just be a regular person. I was amazed. And you can have, you know, you can have telepathy experiences. You can have what my sister calls quinky dinks, coincidences all the time that you have, intuitions, someone's going to call, you have lucid dreams, you have prophetic dreams, you have friends that you just bond with. I've met people that I was instantly telepathic with, and they and I both knew it simultaneously. But there are people, telepathy tapes, that they do this on command, on demand. And you don't have to be a savant to do it. Anybody can do it. You just have to believe to say, oh, it's possible to be telepathy. And then there's all these kids who are savants that they're telepathic, but a lot of these kids are also remote viewers with their eyes covered. So it's called blindsight. So kids can learn this stuff. They can learn to be telepathic. They can learn to be blindsight. These are superhuman abilities, savant abilities. Kids can do this. And if we all become kids, we all can do it too. We stop trying to be adults. Stop thinking it's not possible to do this. So there's a whole bunch of stuff out there, research out there. The internet has made it available to all that stuff, not to mention all the negative social media stuff, but all the positive stuff is also out there. Just focus on the positive stuff. Stop watching CNN and
Yeah.
Fox News and stay in this positive emotional state. There's a thing called in NLP called spatial anchoring. Okay, you can have a spot in your room and you can say, I want to be in love in this spot in the room. So just build up any feeling of love that you want. And then you can have another spot that's 2 feet away from that. Says, this is the, and I'm going to look a different way. You say, this is the space where I'm going to be angry. And so you can you can use this called spatial. This is an NLP concept. Okay. And, and you can switch between those two and you go, oh, this is the love spot. And over here is the angry spot. Well, how many people sit and watch Fox News in their sofa and they've anchored negative emotion to their easy chair in their living room? And all they have to do is sit in the chair and they're in that state. That's why they say, get out and walk in nature. Get out of a negative entropy, a high entropy, angry state that's anchored in with a physical location in your house. Even if you have to move to get rid of it, to get out of it. Stop anchoring yourself with negative emotions in a physical spot in your house. So there's advice for this is right out of NLP. Essentially, I have a master practitioner in NLP that took 5 years for me to develop that. I mean, probably the one that was the spiritually transformative experience is when I went to the Monroe Institute one time, and that was the morning that I didn't talk. It was on a Wednesday, and that was the schedule. You come in on a Friday and you leave on a Friday, but on Wednesday you've been there 4 or 5 days already, and then you say no talking. And then I said, huh. So we were meditating without talking, and I said, huh. I wonder if there's any 4-leaf clovers in here. That thought came up, so I tried looking for them. Okay, and then I realized, I said, okay, that's okay. I don't need to find them. And as soon as I let, that action-oriented looking for them, gave up on that. And I said, it's okay. I don't need to find any 4-leaf clovers. As soon as I did that, the 4-leaf clover said, here I am, literally waving to me. They showed up a slightly different color, and here I am. And so 5 4-leaf clovers later, I was crying, and I got that you can't effort yourself to do this. You have to connect with it. You have to connect with it at that level. So you're one with the 4-leaf clovers. And you can't try to do that. You force it to happen. I always give an example. It says, imagine you're sitting at the edge of a clearing and this fawn comes up. You can't force the fawn to come over and talk with you. But you could attract it with your energy, and it could come up and it would be curious, and you would not scare it away, right? So consciousness is like the fawn that you don't want to scare away and you want to attract to yourself, okay? And so that same morning, later on in that morning, after this 4-leaf clover incident, then I went back and we're in another session with these tapes, and then my spirit guide came and says, "This is space," and created Merkabas, a series of small Merkabas all in a line. And then that line formed a whole nother set of lines. This formed a plane, and then that plane formed another one like this up. It says this is space. Well, essentially, that's what my Existon model of space is. Merkaba is a qubit, essentially, from a mathematical perspective. And so I got essentially a science lesson from this spiritual being the same
Wow.
morning I was talking to Four Leaf Clover. So this would be, and then later that week when we went home, my wife was gone for some reason. So I tried to stay in that state for as long as I could. So I just sat there and kept meditating all weekend. And I just stayed in a state where my whole body was vibrating, right? And people, by the way, try to drive home from a neural institute, never recommend that because they're in this weird state, right? And so by the time Monday came around, I was still in this state. I was like still vibrating from being in this state. I
Wow.
went to work and it was like I could read everybody's mind. And it was like so weird because so if somebody has a near-death experience, they probably are permanently in that state for the rest of their life or for a long period of time until they adjust. And it would be overwhelming to people who didn't know that this was possible. So just realize that you are in high awareness mode, both intellectually, sensory, and emotionally. This is who we really are if we allow ourselves to touch that touching the divine. So there's my parting words and my experience all rolled into one that says it's possible to do this. And listen to all the NDE people, all their stories, amazing. The guy that you had, Vinny Tolman, I
Yes.
love his story when the grass is talking to him and the water is talking to him and the trees. Anytime I hear him, I just love him. His little
Wonderful.
discussion of sensory
Yeah.
reality and meaning and connecting. So
I'm gonna have all of your links in the description. I always do, but just so everyone listening knows,
Existons.one, quantumdog.com has everything, deeprealitybook.com, and coherentspaces.life is the one if you're interested in the in the I didn't talk very much about it, but the device that helps raise the spiritual grade of the room. Essentially, you turn it on and it turns it into a sanctuary. So
this is really cool, actually. If you want to talk about that more, totally
um,
up to you.
you just go to coherentspaces.life, and if people have a question, they can send me questions. And I talk about it in most of my other talks. Um, one spiritual person said it's like when it turns it on, it's like having little bitty snowflakes coming out of it, high dimensional
Hmm.
crystals out of it. And so that's a kind of order that compensates for the fact that we have entropy in our physical world. So it's so not much else to say by that. You just have to be called to be interested in it. And when you do, I manufactured it in my house and ship it from here. So if anyone has any questions about that, there's a ton of details about that on the website. And if somebody's not if interested in it, there's a link out there called free broadcast. You can just take our logo, which is this logo here. You can just take our logo here and put it under your dog's bed or under your bed or on the ceiling and just see this is essentially a talisman for receiving what we're doing. It's like a free broadcast token. And so you put this under your dog's bed and it will change his behavior. And and autistic kids on the spectrum like this too because it helps them collect. That was part of the target audience with this wish device is make a gap, make a landing pad for people who are autistic and on the spectrum because they're super advanced beings and they don't want to connect with their body very much. So we form this intermediate high dimensional landing pad for them and they interact with their body better as a result of that. So
That's incredible. Wow.
Ellie, it's been a great time talking with you.
Doug,
You're
this was
just a
awesome. It really
sweetheart.
was awesome. Thank you so very much, Doug. This really was great.
And thanks again.